So today we're here together to talk about SEO and content marketing. So I'm here to give you a short presentation that I've prepared thoroughly with quite a few elements that I hope you'll find very interesting. The goal is to turn all the challenges you mentioned earlier into opportunities and to see how we can really crush it in 2024 with some amazing results. My name is Léo Poitevin, for those who don't know me. I've been doing SEO for quite some time now, and I've recently become an independent SEO consultant. For a long time, I was an employee. I'm one of the rare SEOs who, after 6, 7, 8 years of experience in SEO, stayed employed for that long. But it was a pleasure. I learned a ton of things, and I was able to gather a lot of experiences that I'm going to share with you today. So let me introduce myself very, very quickly, 3 or 4 points, just to give you an idea of my strengths, weaknesses, what I've done in my life, and why it's interesting to have this discussion today. As it happens, I live in Thailand. So right now, as I'm speaking to you, it's 9:30 where you are, but it's 3:30 p.m. where I am. Why am I in Thailand? Originally, I came here for professional reasons. I came here for a job, a head of SEO position at Glen Tomato Media, which is a very, very good company that mainly does affiliate marketing. And so I stayed for personal reasons because I fell in love with this country. Thank you. Quite simply, it's a beautiful country where the quality of life is extremely good. And so I really enjoyed living in this country, and I continue to do so every day. I've tried many countries. I love traveling, but as it stands, my heart belongs here, truly. I started my SEO career. We were just talking about it earlier with Nicholas at Cdiscount. So that's where I had my first real job as an SEO. And so I know all the related issues very well. Large accounts, everything involving internal politics, and all the strategies you can have for sites on a very, very large scale. So it was very interesting to start my career there, and it meant that I started out with the biggest players, you could say. It was truly excellent. And then I continued my journey. So now it's been, as I was saying, 7 or 8 years that I've been doing SEO so far. I continued my journey at Apples Discounts through affiliate marketing in a field that was extremely competitive, which is the gambling industry in general. So I spent 5 years in that field where I quickly climbed the ranks, starting out as an SEO executive, doing relatively basic tasks in a secondary market, then moving on to head of SEO positions in some very interesting companies like Green Tomato Media, where I accomplished some great things. So there you have it. It was a big adventure, and I hope that this whole journey allowed me to gather enough data, and that today I'm here to share it with you, to offer you all of my experience. How much content have I ordered? We're here to talk about content, so let's talk about content. So here we're talking about names, about words. It's not the number of pieces of content. So 18 million, that's the estimate of what I ordered, approximately in terms of word count. I think the reality is maybe a bit lower. Maybe we're around 12, between 10 and 12 million. But basically, with the teams I managed, with the writers I supervised, it was on large volumes. I think I ordered on average 300,000 words per month across dozens and dozens of sites. And so that gives quite a bit of experience, quite a bit of feedback. Now, I have a lot of knowledge about what makes my content work and what makes content rank or not, what makes for a good strategy or not. That's what I've gathered with 18 million words invested, not at my own expense, but at the expense of the companies I worked for. And so it was very interesting. We're going to talk about quite a few things in this presentation. I've noted here roughly 6 main points that we'll cover. Overall, the presentation will be focused on what makes content good content. SEO, how do you create good content? SEO, what are the things that make SEO content good? That's what we'll see. Everything I've gathered in terms of experience, I'm going to share with you today. Quite simply, we're going to talk about the user intent, which I find overall is not very well defined, but I'll explain it to you in more depth. The inverted pyramid, a central element of SEO content. How do you stand out? Because for internet users, how do you stand out for Google? Because standing out for Google is something that's necessary. The fundamentals of EAT, and therefore some of the key aspects we SEOs are used to discussing among ourselves. A small section on images and visuals, because content without images or visuals would be a bit much and honestly a bit hard to read. And finally, we'll move on to information density. There you go. I hope you'll enjoy it. Get your questions ready. If you see anything here or there that interests you in this outline in my presentation, jot your questions down to the side. I'll answer them at the end. So first, let's start by talking. I'll put up a little instinct tips screen whenever I give you a tip, some information, or something interesting and actionable. I've noticed quite a few times that people were a bit worried regarding SGE, and I was the first to be very concerned. Regarding SGE, so SGE stands for Search Generative Experience, which allows you to get AI-generated answers directly in Google. So SGE is something that worries quite a lot of people. And as it stands, if someone told me that SGE was the AI output of ChatGPT, I would more or less know what to expect. I would know what the SGE outputs would look like because I know how ChatGPT behaves, because I've used ChatGPT dozens and dozens of times. But now what we don't know is that it's Gemini that's going to power SGE, that's going to provide the AI, which used to be Bard before and has now been transferred to Gemini. And so if you want to learn to better understand SGE, because in fact, mastering something means understanding it, first of all, use Gemini. Start using Gemini instead of GPT. And so throughout this presentation, which you'll see several times, I will use Gemini instead of GPT. This is something I do regularly now to better understand the different AIs, and especially to better understand SGE, which will hit us sooner or later. So we'll start by talking about the importance of user intent. Your user is asking a question. What is it? Let's define it that way. And actually, we often describe the concept of user intent like this. We say that we talk about informational intent, navigational, transactional, with different goals, a goal to reach a website, a goal to make a purchase, a goal to obtain information. That's true, but it's not enough. Actually, as it stands, I think it's clearly not sufficient to talk about what a query is, what the person is looking for with a query. So how do I describe it? Personally, I usually describe it this way. I ask myself, what is the question the user is asking themselves when they're typing this keyword? If someone is typing something like, I don't know, solar panel, agent, what question are they asking themselves? What information are they looking for? What do they ultimately want to get? And the goal is going to be to structure our answer, to structure our page, to structure the way we interact with them as if we were responding verbally, to frame their query as a question and to address that. Sometimes there are things that will lead to several potential questions. In that case, potentially we'll create several pages. Instead of making just one page, one title, one question, one page, we'll be able to make several. A quick shout out to 1to2pages.com, which for me is a really, really good service that's free, developed by Amaury Duval, who's a great guy and who's offering this tool for free. I'm going to show you a few presentations with 1to2pages.com on some interesting topics. So there you go, instant tip, we're using Gemini. We're getting straight to the heart of the matter. We're not just here for theory, we're going to dive right into practical stuff. So I had a client who was telling me about a rocket called photovoltaic H1. And so if someone types in photovoltaic on an empty stomach, what question are they actually asking themselves? So we asked Gemini, because it's Google that's going to answer these questions. It's Google that's going to define it. We can make a list of questions about the SWOT ourselves, or we can ask the AI to do it. That works too. And everything starts from there. This step is almost the most important of all. So there are several possible questions, but the main question, according to Gemini, is whether it is possible to install photovoltaic solar panels in Asian and how much it might cost. And we have other questions below that. In particular, what are the solar panel companies in Asian? What is Asian solar potential? And so on. So here we might wonder, okay, we have a list of pages, a list of questions people are asking. Are we going to make one page? Are we going to make 2 pages? Or are we going to do something else? So let's try it out. The 1to2pages tool, so 1to2pages.com. Try it. I swear to you, it's worth it. And so what I do with 1to2pages.com is, instead of comparing keywords, because in this case, we only have one keyword, which is photovoltaic in Asian, I'm going to compare questions to see if the questions have the same results pages or not. So here, for example, in this case, for the first query, is it possible to install photovoltaic panels in Asian versus a second query, so a second question. What are the solar panel companies in Asian? Google tells us, because 1to2pages.com is based on Google's server, that you should create a single page. On the other hand, if, for example, we ask, what is the solar potential of Asian, and is it possible to install photovoltaic panels in Asian? These are 2 different questions, so we would need to create 2 different pages. So this allows us to group together sometimes the same question or different questions. And so, for example, we can say that this is a single page and a single question. And we will answer everything on the same page for these 2 pages and 2 questions. So for me, intents are questions, and they need to be defined more closely and more precisely. Now, SGE, we're going to talk about SGE as well. It's a topic that has come up quite a bit in the problems you have in 2024 and the challenges you're facing for 2024. SGE is only available in the United States. Well, not just in the United States, it's available in many more countries, the United States, Japan, and quite a few others. Others as well, I think. I think it's in India too, though I'm not 100% sure. I see from the audience that someone is confirming it's India. So I personally used it with the United States because that's where the SERPs are the most developed. That's where SGE is the most advanced. So there you go, I ran the test. For example, SGE, solar panel, Washington, do we get any results? How does it come up? And so on. And so it does come up. For solar panel Washington, we get the AI block. So here the result looks like this. You'll see the artificial intelligence block. However, it doesn't show up for every city. So just so you know, I tried 5 different cities and it only appeared for Washington. So overall, local results. So here, let me tell you some very general analyses which are highly uncertain, but that's what they're worth, and it's better to be prepared with uncertainty than not be prepared at all. Local results will probably be somewhat spared depending on how much data Google has for each SERP, etc. by the SGE, or maybe simply that the solar panel sector will be left out, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's more a matter of local results. Next. So that was the whole little section about informational intent and how will Google address intent with the LGE or not. So quite interesting. Next, we'll talk about the quality of information. There's something we often talk about, which is often a bit of a dangerous topic. It's often said that if your information is false, you won't show up on Google. And I think that's true. Well, that's the case. And if your information is false, you lose credibility, and that's not something you want. But also, you'll clearly have a ranking problem, I think, because Google has ways to verify certain information. So make sure your information is accurate. How do you get correct information? Several things. It's a bit about having a clear conscience. How do you say it exactly? But there you go. Listen, ask your suppliers for information. If you have commercial products, if you're selling something, etc., ask the supplier for the information because that's the best source. They're the manufacturer, so they're the ones who will give you the best information. Search on the internet, but always cross-check 2 or 3 sources online. I work in fields where sometimes there were people who gave information that wasn't correct. So, in fact, we end up having to go and double-check that. In the crypto world, there are people who spread false information. If you're a writer, if the person writing only uses a single source of information, it's often risky. We're dealing with something very risky. What you can do is rely on proofreading by an expert. That's always a good way to do things. If you have an expert on hand to proofread and it seems coherent to them, generally you avoid major blunders at least. And finally, when I talk about information here, I'm often talking about information, pure information, knowing that a sofa is 1.20 meters long, for example. That's information. It's accurate, it's fundamental, and it's not subjective. It's objective information. So here, when I talk about information, I'm talking about objective information. You can also provide subjective information, but it's important to define and state that it's subjective information, to frame it and present it as such. Do not use AI for information that is not evergreen, meaning information that is not perpetual over time, for example. And data about the planet and the fact that there are 365 days in a year, those are pieces of information that AI will normally always have correct, although it's possible they could be wrong. But generally, nowadays, AIs are pretty reliable on that. But information about Neverland, for example, I asked about that in mid-February, and it told me December 1st, so it was way off. If you ask, I don't know, for example, about the composition of the US Congress in terms of Democratic senators, VSC, Republican representatives, maybe it will get it wrong because, in fact, it only has historical data, so it's a bit complicated. So for anything that tends to change, we don't use AI. That's just a little reminder, just in case. A good way to provide a lot of comprehensive information is to have briefs that are extremely thorough. That's something I always rely on. Either you have someone who is truly an expert in their field write it, which honestly usually costs quite a lot. But that way you don't have to spend time creating a brief and you get someone who is very knowledgeable, or at least you have a lighter brief and can be confident in the information. Or you create briefs that are extremely thorough. And honestly, a truly thorough brief can only be done perfectly by an expert. Let's imagine, for example, that we're talking about the Eiffel Tower. This is actually the example I wanted to give. So let's say introduction about the Eiffel Tower. I want you to give me the date of the last renovation, the number of people who visit every day, the percentage of tourists, etc. And this allows you to get a lot of information and even ask your writers for more details than they might be able to provide. It's a good technique for achieving a high density of information, something we'll talk about a bit later, that is extremely thorough and complete. A good way to do this is, once again, to use AI. What I did was I took, for example, imagine it's a topic. History of the Eiffel Tower. I had taken the introductions and the first paragraphs of each section. So here you can't see it because I minimized the prompt, but that's what I did. There you go. Don't write the sections. Just give me the instructions and information that my competitors have looked for. I had the section 1 copy-pasted, section 2 copy-pasted, and that way it will extract the objective information found in the text from section 1 and section 2, and it will give us something interesting to look for. Thank you. A third section. And so here is the list of information that our writer needs to fill in. So SGE, present a little test. The SGE test is SGE present on the Eiffel Tower, on the topic of the Eiffel Tower, and the data about the Eiffel Tower. So I tried Eiffel Tower, I tried Eiffel. Tower history, so it wasn't present on the main queries, let's say, but it was present on some queries. Eiffel Tower data, so we had some data related to the Eiffel Tower. So Be careful, if you work with data, that's where AI can most easily pull it out. The information, since it retrieves it from structured data models, etc. And the knowledge graph. So here, the data, in my opinion, it's going to be pretty devastating in this area. Be careful if you deal with data. SGE could really hurt. Next, I wanted to talk to you about pre-search knowledge. We often talk about personas. Personally, I really don't like talking about personas because I think we're focusing on the wrong thing, actually. In fact, we're creating an identity, whereas we should be assembling an aggregate of people who are searching for the same things, who have the same interests. So there you go. I put together a little persona case for you to show you why I don't like personas. I created Léo Poitevin, a nurse. She's someone who actually looks a lot like my mother, to be honest. I'll let you read all the details more closely yourself. Everything will be available during the replay. If you're interested, you'll receive the slides, so you'll be able to read all of it. But quite simply, the things she likes are yoga, personal balance, and so on. She doesn't like it when people disagree with homeopathy and so on. So I asked Gemini, I gave it a little prompt, how do you write for Claire? So I had my character, and then I asked Gemini, how do I write for this person? And it told me, emphasize health logistics, highlight her experience as a nurse. So that's something I've seen in content briefs from people who say, here's our persona, it's this type of person, this job, this experience. I want us to talk to them on Twitter for real, and so on. Personally, it's something I don't like because it means we're focusing too much on one type of person and not on a shared interest, unfortunately. So I took another example. I tried to give you another example, which is the mystery internet user. So that's the shared interest. In fact, we don't know who this person is. We just know there's a common interest. They searched for best CBD oil. So this person, for example, likes CBD oil and likes to look things up on Google. Those are the two things we know. So there you go. In my opinion, there's no need to create elaborate personas. And finally, I asked myself how we should write for this person from the university, for Mr. Muster, who searched for the best CBD oils. And in general, when I ask myself how we should write for someone, we know their reason. First, we define, it's what we did earlier, we define their question. What is their question? So best CBD oils, that's easy. It's what are the best CBD oils? So we have their question. Now we're going to ask ourselves, and this is where I think it's important, what does this person already know? Because if we talk to someone by giving them things they already know, it won't be interesting for them. It won't be great. In fact, they need something they don't know and they're coming to look for information. So you're not going to talk to them about things they already know. And that's what Gemini does. The points I've written down for you, Gemini is the one who gave them to me. But quite simply, they know the difference between things. They know what CBD is. They know the different forms of consumption. They know it's used for stress, anxiety, pain, etc. They know why they're looking for it. They're just looking for the best option in the end. They want the pros and cons of each. They want us to compare them and so on. Maybe there are a few small things they don't know yet. Thank you. For example, the spectrum, full spectrum versus broad spectrum versus isolate. That's a bit of CBD seller jargon, but just to give you some specifics that maybe this person doesn't know yet. So there you go. I'm showing you what knowledge someone might already have. So actually take your keyword. Here, in this case, we took an example with CBD hake. What does the person already know? Well, all those things, it's better if they're not in our content because it won't be very interesting content for that person. I've done several tests. We're with CMJ today, so let's have some fun and test CMJ a bit. I've tested CMJ on several things. So here, in this case, I made a little brief, but there was a CBD. I sent the outline it proposes by default with half artificial intelligence, half scraping, I think. And so there you go. There are a few interesting points. What's interesting is that we have points like advantages, disadvantages, how to choose, and so on. These are things that are interesting. When someone is searching for a query like best, or when they're looking for how to choose, etc., it's always useful to have these things like how to choose. Advantages, these are points that come up all the time. As we were saying earlier, maybe the person doesn't know what CBD is, full spectrum, the difference between full spectrum, isolate, etc. So little details about CBD. And so here, in this case, it's interesting because we have this part. And finally, at the beginning, we have understanding CBD oils. Understanding CBD oils, there are two ways to interpret it. Either you think of understanding the oil as a concept, and in that case, it's not very interesting for an internet user to understand oil as a concept, because actually a person who comes to understand oil as a concept, if someone is interested in buying oil, they already know what the concept of oil is, so it won't be very interesting for them. But understanding oils in general and being told the best oil is this one, the second best is that one, or for stress, use this one, and for pain, use that one. In that case, it becomes extremely interesting if we talk about oil, about oils in the singular, and about each one's identity. So there you have it. Potentially oils, if we treat it as the oil, the concept, it's not interesting. And we're not really answering the user's question. This person already knows what CBD oil is. What they want to know is which ones are the best. So understanding the best ones, understanding CBD oils. I would have just rephrased it as the best CBD oils, quite simply. And there you go. We immediately provide the information about the best CBD oils. And by doing that, normally we end up with a page that's overall very interesting for our user, Mr. Mystery. Whereas if we had just wanted to write to speak to their heart and respect the convictions of our nurse, we might not have been very relevant with the information she has or doesn't have. We'll talk about it later, but SGE won't cover certain sectors. Indeed, Google won't get involved in every sector, and typically the CBD sector, which we can consider a bit sensitive. Personally, it's not a sector I consider sensitive, but I know some people always say that CBD is a special kind of sector. And that's the case for Google anyway. So Google won't go into SERPs related to CBD. It won't go into lots of other SERPs either, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Next, we move on to the topic of the inverted pyramid. The inverted pyramid is really a topic that I find extremely important and that I have often emphasized for the people I manage and my SEO team. Inverted pyramid, what does that mean? Why do we talk about the inverted pyramid? Because it's not uncommon for people who write content for the web to do so using an academic structure. So they write with an introduction, a first part, a second part, and a conclusion. And so when we analyze these articles, when we look at them, we see that the introduction generally sets up the topic. The first part is a distinct element. It's an interesting section. The second part is another section, for example, the advantages of a product, the disadvantages of a product. And then we move on to the conclusion, which gives an overall opinion and a quick plus and minus, a summary of the article itself. Now, I don't want that. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Imagine you're in a hurry. You're on the internet. You're on your phone. Do you really want to scroll through a whole article just to find the pros, the cons, and so on, and then go all the way to the end just to get an opinion? No, honestly, that's not what you want. I don't think that's what you want. And so several things are important. I think you need to answer a user's question the same way you would respond in a conversation. For example, if tomorrow someone asks me what the best CBD oils are, I'm not going to start by saying, listen, let me take 10 minutes to talk to you about CBD oils, first redefining what CBD is and so on. And then I'll give you the best CBD oils. No, what I'll actually say as an expert, because if someone is asking you a question, it's because you're an expert, I'll tell them the best CBD oils are this one, and that one, depending on whether you're looking for stress relief, pain relief, and so on. Then I'll say, wait, let's go into a bit more detail. The more we focus on pain, it's because pain is what interests you. Okay, let's say, for example, that we know people are mostly looking for pain relief, or that people are mostly searching for stress relief or for anxiety and so on. Normally, we know this from Google searches. I don't yet have enough expertise on CBD oils to tell you exactly what people are searching for the most. But let's imagine it's pain. We'll say, okay, if you're looking for pain relief, we'll recommend this to you. For these use cases, this for those use cases, and so on. Basically go more and more into detail. But we start with the essentials. And the conclusion is something that shouldn't even exist. The word conclusion shouldn't even appear on the internet. No conclusion. Because a conclusion is an overall opinion. It's a summary. It's actually the most interesting part. We should always start with a conclusion. So I think all web articles should start with a conclusion. They shouldn't start with a conclusion that's just a conclusion, but they should instead start with a key point, a concise and informative introductory paragraph that gives all the fundamental core elements and all the interesting things covered in the article, carefully summarized into several key bullet points. So there you have it, the key points. If you don't know how to do them, just take your conclusion and put it in bullet points. That's the best way to do it. Very simple, very effective. And we answer on one page, I think, just like we would answer orally. If you start thinking this way, you're already 90% ahead of people who just produce fluff. And then these inverted pyramid rules, they apply to the page as a whole. So of course they apply to our entire page about the best CBD oil. We start with the basics, CBD oil, etc. We talk about isolate, we talk about that. But it also applies to each section. So actually when we start with the best CBD oils and we do an introduction about the best CBD oils, we're not going to start by saying, I know, number 10 is this one, number 9 is that one, and have a little YouTube style ranking just to boost watch time and make people scroll further down, etc. No, we're going to mention the first one right away. Someone who asks about the best CBD oils wants to know which one is the best. Then maybe they want to know the second or third best, but they rarely want to know the 10th or even the first in a long list. So always start every section, every piece of content with the most interesting thing right away in one sentence in 50 characters, and that will also help you grab position 0. Quick tip. I'm giving you this article. I've already explained the concept in detail, but I'm sharing this article with you so you can read it. It's an extremely interesting article. And personally, out of everything I've read on the concepts of writing for the web, it best summarizes the concept of the inverted pyramid. So I was here on CMJ. We're going to review this article from the perspective of the inverted pyramid. Do the best CBD oils as presented by CMJ really follow the inverted pyramid structure? So we need to analyze this. First, we can see that, so understanding CBD oils, as we mentioned earlier, let's take the approach where we say it gives us oil 1, oil 2, oil 3, oil 4, oil 5. As we said earlier, this way it's more practical. We know it's good. And when we look at it from this angle, understanding CBD oils, it's a very good H1, a very good H2, and a very effective way to present it. Let's rephrase it once again. What are the best CBD oils? Because understanding oils sounds a bit like we're going to give you a bunch of concepts, whereas when we ask what are the best oils, we get straight to the point and we know exactly what we're talking about. What is full spectrum CBD? That could potentially be interesting, especially for understanding the rest of the article. So it might be useful to have that at the beginning. But personally, I think I would have put it a little lower. And then we should see if the most important things for people are sleep, pain, and anxiety in that order or not. If that's the case, then we're all in and we've done things right. Next, I'm going to gradually teach you how to stand out on Google. How do I stand out on Google? And what is my strategy? This part comes from not from an observation, but from a patent I got from Google that I saw from Google from someone who had analyzed it and theorized about it. And what they said, and this is the case for American search queries. If you look, for example, at best CBD oil, I think that's the case, the top 5 or top 10 in the US. The 10 pieces of content are exactly the same. They're all over-optimized. Each has 5,000 words. They're all very dense with information. The quality is very high. Overall, it's very well done. But basically, it's the same 10 pieces of content because that's the best way. It's the best possible content. They've almost hit the glass ceiling of the best possible content. And so Google is going to start saying, if you're all making the same content, and that's what might happen, that everyone ends up making the same content, because in fact, that's the best way to produce the best content and the best information. We're going to ask you to stand out. How are we going to stand out? That's the big question. There are 2 ways to stand out. Either you're better or you're different. For me, those are the 2 main ways I suggest. Being better is better, as you might expect. Being different is a good option to adopt. I think it won't be the best in the long run, but it's also a good way to do things. It works well and it's a bit easier. How do you become better? You bring new information. For me, that's kind of what I used to describe to my teams as the price you have to pay to get a seat at the table. Typically, when you have a poker table, you have to pay X euros to get a seat at the table. So that's the price you have to pay. It's simply what you put on the table. And we all remember those movies where they put car keys or things like that on the table. It creates legendary scenes and it's great. And actually, it's up to you to look for those legendary scenes in the greenhouses. We will have to come in with new information. I'll explain to you later how to create new information that has never been read on the internet before, that's completely exclusive, and that gives you an advantage over your competitors. The remaining 2 methods are, first, quite simply to approach the information with either a brand new angle or an entirely original tone of voice. I'll explain to you right away how to do it. And the last method is to bombard with very simple but effective and quite lethal examples. As a method, I think. I'll break it down for you. You'll see it's nice. First thing, changing the angle. I'll describe to you how to change the angle. Changing the angle, for example, you all know the product tests on FR Android. If you don't know them, go check them out because it's a masterclass in reviews and affiliate marketing at FR Android. It's one of the best sites ever made in France in terms of affiliate marketing. So big shout out to the FR Android team. So basically, here's what happens. What happens is that they test the products. Let's imagine they released the new Pixel 8, Pixel 8, Pixel 7. Well, let's say Pixel 8, Pixel 8. They released the new Pixel 8. And so what they would do is bring in an expert on the phone. They would test the product. They would test it. How long does it last? The camera, how long does it last? Are the photos good quality? Is it easy to type? And then the expert gives you an analysis. That's something we could do if we had the reach of Android Effect, because Android Effect has that kind of reach. And actually they could do it. It would be the same thing. But instead of having a thank you angle, an expert gives you their opinion. It's an aggregation of opinions from several users. And so we could have all Pixel 8 users telling us, for example, we aggregate all the data. We see your average battery life when you're watching a video. You do a survey. They give you all your data. And we state the average time. According to 27 users who have been using the Pixel 8 for an average of 10 weeks, it's 17 hours of battery life when watching a video. And actually, when you have that, you have a new angle, something new. It's information that's completely different, yet the same. In the end, because we're talking about battery life, we're talking about usage. It's the same information we're giving, but it's a completely different angle, a different way of doing it. So that's interesting because we're changing the perspective. And actually, if all our competitors have the same angle, we can go and present exactly the same page, but with a different angle. And then it's no longer the same page, change of tone, change of tone. So here we thought about it, or rather we didn't even have to, it's directly for the AI. So here I used Gemini, I used it to, recreate this paragraph. I like the satirical tone. Personally, definitely, because satire is an exercise I really enjoy, and it's a tone you rarely find on the internet, so there's little chance of self-plagiarizing, etc. And I specified without using more words, because Google can have a tendency to do that. Gemini and AIs in general can have a tendency, if you just give them a framework like rewrite this with a change of tone. So typically they would give me paragraphs that were much longer. So in the end, we no longer had the same thing, and we would end up damaging our content in another way, which we'll discuss later, namely the grading. So here, in this case, change of tone without using more words, satirical, boom, change of tone. And here, when you read this, it's not at all the same feeling you get, and it's not the same way of delivering information, and Google notices it. Users notice it too, so changing the tone when everyone else uses the same serious tone can be interesting. I'm not saying you should always use a satirical tone, of course, but you can have a tone that's different and slightly more interesting than what your competitors are doing. Creation of information. Let's go back to CBD. That's a field I know well. Creating information is extremely complicated. With AI, it's actually theoretically impossible, since AI is fed, nourished, and trained with information that already exists. So having new information coming from it seems complicated. But for example, as a human, I'll give you an example about CBD. There are a lot of e-commerce sites in the CBD sector that are owned by the same company, Molding, so I won't mention the name just to avoid outing anyone. People, situations, but typically shopcbd.com, CBDA chat. We have 3 e-commerce sites, CBDA, CBDC, all 3 owned by the same person. No one has ever said this on the internet. If you look at the legal notices of each site individually, it's visible, but no one has made the connection and said yes. Shop 1, 2, and 3 belong to that holding company. If you say it and you're the first to do so, you've just created information. It was information that no one had gathered together, compiled to present it, birth on the internet. So it's a good way to create information. And finally, bombard with examples. Bombarding with examples is an easy method to use, I think, and honestly, it's kind of enjoyable because it's easy. And when something is easy, it's satisfying to have things that work and are simple. Typically, imagine you're an e-commerce business and you're selling sectional sofas, green sectional sofas. This is my thing. Céliscon, the furniture that comes back. So there you go. We want to know what kind of furniture would go well with this green sectional sofa for a living room, for example. And so here they give me lots of different styles depending on the color. Is it glass? Is it dark green or light green, etc.? Forest green. It just goes on and on. The examples are endless. I had to stop there, but there were so many examples. Imagine on your e-commerce site, little tabs with examples. Your home has this kind of style. You want a sofa in that color. And then boom, you get content suggestions with ideas for combinations, other pieces of furniture, potentially from your e-commerce store. That would be huge. Honestly, in terms of conversion, content, and SEO, it would be an all-in. So there you go. Bombarding with examples works really well. You'll see throughout the presentation, I use examples that are completely diverse and varied, just to show that most of the strategies I'm presenting to you are totally applicable in any field. So for example, furniture, it works, but we could do it with lots of other things. We're going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of EAT. EAT, as a reminder, stands for experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and chess-wishness. So in French, experience, expertise, authority, and reliability. Authority is linked to relationships, so we won't talk about it any more than that. Reliability is linked to, I don't remember what it's linked to. I think reliability is more about the overall criteria of the site. Experience is really about whether you demonstrate experience on your site, and we'll talk about that a little later. And expertise is clearly about semantics. So there you go. Now we're going to talk about how to work on EAT, several things on how to work on ET. Semantics. So as we said, expertise and semantics. That's for sure. Everyone pretty much agrees on that. So writer expert to have good semantics, or else good tools. The right tools work very well too. We have plenty of good semantic tools, including CMJ in France. So it's something that works well. Transparency and honesty regarding the authors. That's something that will typically be interesting for the reliability aspect. If you are able to say, here you go, I have my legal notices, I have my contact pages, you have my address, you know my authors, you know their social networks, that demonstrates real reliability. It's interesting. It doesn't strengthen your entire EAT. It only strengthens reliability, but it's something that's quite interesting. And then first-hand experience. So that's the experience that was added not long ago. And so first-hand experience is basically showing that you have really tested the product, that you know what you're talking about, that you have experience and a relationship with this product. Typically, for example, not long ago, I was playing The Sims on my computer. And knowing that after playing The Sims for 5 hours, your eyes hurt and your laptop is burning your legs, that's firsthand experience. That's really something you only know firsthand. If you've played The Sims for 5 hours, you also know that at some point your sim will probably get stuck in a corner or something like that. And those are details you wouldn't know if you only looked at the game's cover or just read information about it online. It's our personal experience. So when you say that, people will think, oh yeah, he really did play The Sims. I'm going to give you several experiences. First, let's talk about something. Semantic expertise. Semantic expertise. For example, here we're talking about the basement ventilation system, VMC Cave. So I asked Gemini, where we're using AI, we're making the most of AI. In 2024 with Sena AI, you have to know how to use it to its fullest potential. What kind of language would a construction expert use to talk about a basement ventilation system? Several terms they would use. They would use terms like single flow VMC, double flow, humidity controlled, and so on. So that's interesting. Here we have a lot of interesting things that we should include in content, because if we don't mention these, we're not experts. We're not experts on basement ventilation systems. So I tested it on CMJ to see if CMJ as a semantic tool would give us good results. And yeah, actually, I saw quite a few things. Here, you can't really see it very well. But on the right in the options column, there's the humidity controlled side and there's the duct network side. So these are things we had already seen here, or else gap duct, etc. But we also have the double flow, the air extractor, which are also things we had seen here. Single flow, double flow, air extractor. Not everything is there because there were others in there, and because not everything is necessarily important to mention. But we can see that CMJ is already quite good at mentioning all these things, which are terms, technical expertise. And if we don't use them in our content and keep talking about basements, what is a basement, etc., and being very generic without using technical terms, no expertise, first-hand experience. Here, I'll give you an example. This is something that works really, really well. Personally, I find this is the best way I have to demonstrate first-hand experience with AI, where AI is usually not something that allows you to show first-hand experience. So real hands-on experience, something we've actually used. What I do is, the technique is to compare one product with another. Typically, in this case, I took product 1 and product 2. We're talking about BB guns here. So I said, here you go, take it apart. A lack of experience with product 1, while mentioning in this experience the comparison with product 2. That's really learning. I tried it myself, so I put in descriptions for product 1, descriptions for product 2, and that's what works. I think that's the best way, having done it myself. Getting a feel for the BB gun. So here, he's going to explain to us how he handles the BB gun and so on. So you put a bit of that side in, and then you compare it with the other. And actually, when we read something, so here, in this case, he was saying, for example, the hop-up sight system on the Colt 911 is more pleasant to use than the one on the ASG Stim 1911. I don't know. I haven't used these models, so I can't tell you. I can't confirm it for you. But when someone tells us that something is better than another, it gives us the impression of expertise, the impression of experience, the impression of a test. It simply tells us that it's good. We don't get the impression of a test. Anyone can say it's good. Anyone can say, I read on the internet that it was good. But saying that the product is better than the blue product in one aspect, one feature, that's really something quite unique to the experience people are supposed to have, and from which that experience comes. Let's talk a bit about images. Images are something from a field that I hate. I'll tell you straight up, I'm extremely bad at graphic design. Everything I make is ugly. It's important to have images in content. And I'll explain why. I tried to add little punchy phrases. Beauty is subjective, not screenshots. Quite simply, here are the little images that I include in content. Why? Because a screenshot that's annotated with big red text, big arrows, etc. allows you to provide information, to add to the information, to support a point, to reinforce a text that the internet might have written, that our writer might have written, and that we would have produced for the internet. Here, for example, in this case, I think that having information that is clear and understandable is much more important than having things that are just beautiful, actually. Beautiful things rarely make an impression, whereas when we're looking for information on the internet, we prefer to have something that's interesting. Typically, in this case, screenshot world, a bit ugly, etc. But we know what we're talking about. We can see exactly what's being pointed out. Archery, for example. So there you go. Here, it's the worst of the worst, it's the worst of the worst, and the best of the best, because we can see exactly what we're talking about. The image of archery, which is at the bottom, is a bit better. So we imagine there's a text that goes along with this, and we see that the text maybe even adds little ones, little twos, red circles, meaning this or that. This is how you shoot a bow and so on. So this allows us to have more information, to have things that are interesting, but without it being too awful either. We have a photo and so on. And the last one, it's okay. In fact, we're going to take a photo or put an image of the phenomenon that's happening, and we can see that we're focusing on it. We can see that it's the main element of the photo. In this case, it must be a jammed bullet. I'm not a firearms expert. but we can see that it's a phenomenon we're highlighting now. These are horrible and ugly graphics. Maybe that's not what we want everywhere on our site either. Maybe sometimes you think, I don't know what image to use. I feel like putting this, let's talk a bit about beauty. Quite simply for beauty, if you want photorealism, you go to Midjourney. If you want one click, you go to DALL-E. DALL-E is ChatGPT. Midjourney is a Discord server. I'll let you look into it and learn more about these topics. Typically, for example, with DALL-E, here I included all the elements we already saw in the presentation. We have blackjack, like we saw earlier, for loading. We have better CBD games. We have everything. We have firearms. We have an Eiffel Tower. We even have solar panels that are still hiding. So that's one click. It's generated directly. With DALL-E, we even have a VM0. We couldn't do that. It would have been impossible to do. With Midjourney in one click, I think, very complicated, whereas this took me a second. So there you go, but it's less beautiful and less photorealistic. Next, let's talk about the amount of information. My credo and my motto regarding the amount of information is use as many words as others, but provide more information. That way you have a page that's better than your competitors, quite simply. I'll explain how to do it very simply. You write as many words as the average of the top 3. So you take the average of the top 3, the same number of words. And then when your writer has provided that to you, let's say a page of 1,000 words, for example, you remove all the sentences that are unnecessary. You shorten it. You take out everything that's unnecessary. We remove uninteresting mentions, cutting 1,000 words down to 700. But since the top result has 1,000, we must add 300 back. And so we add information. We make sure that it's new information that wasn't already there. And we add them in, and that's going to be interesting. Here, I'm giving you an example, for instance, how to reduce the word count with GPT. That works 100%. It's really great. Here, I'm giving you an example about the new online locker, which was a text that had been written. I did a reduction. I'll let you read both texts, but here we have a text with 35% fewer characters without losing any information. So in fact, we lost 35% of the fluff, as I mentioned earlier, on the page. We still have just as much information in the text. So it's really top-notch, I think, in terms of the amount of information and what we're going to get out of it. And in fact, you end up with a text that's simply 10 times better than your competitors, because every sentence that's read is interesting and contains information, whereas your competitors will have little moments of emptiness in their text. I was on CMJ, quite interesting. So there are two things that are noteworthy. CMJ always promotes the idea of having writers assisted and not pure artificial intelligence. So in this case, for example, it would be interesting. I generated content, for example. I generated the paragraphs on VMI and VMC. And so actually, unfortunately, it learned to understand the ventilation of a damp cellar directly through VMI and VMC, whereas below there was a VMI and VMC system. So we end up with a bit of a duplicate. If you read each sentence in these paragraphs, they are all interesting and each contains information. Then all of them contain interesting information. That's already a major strength, and AI is very good at that. Almost all the information provided in a text is honestly quite interesting. The weak point is that it's possible, as we see here, for things to get repetitive in long, poorly guided content, where the same information is repeated. And so at some point, we end up lacking fresh, solid, new information, really good new content. So there are times when you'll get a bit of a repetition between the beginning and the end, something that really should be fixed with a good human edit. We've reached the end of this presentation. I've talked quite a bit. This is my little conclusion. So we've seen Gemini quite a few times. It can do a lot of things. AI is very powerful. It can do a lot of things. What will happen when it wants to act on its own? What will happen when Gemini, that is the SGE, arrives and wants to give the answers and produce content for you? There are several solutions for that. Personally, I see 3 main ones, which are all good solutions. The first one is probably the easiest. It's probably the one that requires the least effort from you, let's say. It's to keep studying Google, to keep studying AI, to keep using Gemini, or to start using Gemini and to understand how its algorithm works, what will happen, what kind of information it will provide, and where it will go, where it won't go, how things will unfold, and where it will pull information from. Since it's very difficult to know where it's getting its information from, we're not good enough yet to figure that out. It doesn't take it from the top 10 of the SERP, so it's going to be a different game than SEO. But there you have it, actually. If you analyze the system a lot, you always end up understanding it. And once you understand it, you can master it. That's the most important thing. Second point, go where it won't go. As we've seen, CBD, for example, is an area where Google probably won't go. All the domains you consider dodgy, touchy, a bit borderline, the ones people avoid talking about because they're not sexy, etc. With those, you can be pretty sure it won't go there. So overall, there are plenty of niches that won't be affected. And if you're extremely worried, and there are cases where you might be worried even if you're doing affiliate marketing for sneakers, Well, actually, try searching for the best sports shoes. You'll see that SGE completely dominates the SERP and it's impossible to outrank it. So that's something that's going to be complicated. The last point is to move towards multi-channel. Actually, I recently started offering SEO content on YouTube. It's something I really enjoy. And I think YouTube is a very, very good platform. It's going to become a search engine, or maybe even eventually bigger than Google. I don't know. We're still a long way from that, honestly, but it's going to be a source of information. Huge. Go on YouTube, go on TikTok, make short formats, make videos in my format of tomorrow. It's a way to escape the eyes. You can't escape Google, absolutely. But well, there you go. It's interesting. Thank you very much for attending this conference. I hope you found it all very interesting. And there you go. Thank you very much. Nicholas, feel free to follow me on Twitter if you want to get little bits of information like this daily, regularly. And if you have any questions, now is the time.
Thank you, Leo, for all this advice. So I see we have quite a few questions right in the questions tab with many votes. So I suggest that in the few minutes we have left, you answer the ones with the most votes. So there's a first question, which is, if we give the answer directly, the reader will quickly leave the page and Google, in the end, might consider that the content isn't relevant, which would be a bit counterproductive. So that was in particular, I think, in relation to the inverted pyramid technique about quickly delivering value in the eyes of the reader.
So 100% that's true. It's something people have often told me personally, and it's crazy because sometimes I really respect Google's guidelines and other times I don't respect them at all. But when it comes to content, I always respect them a lot. And Google always says, don't be a villain. We're here for internet users. We're here for the users. We're here to help them. And so if helping someone means they come and then leave, well, so much the better. They came for information. We give them the information. We can try to convert them right away. We can put a little sales link for them. But there you go. In my experience with the sites I've worked on, in any case, people leave the site pretty quickly. So we might as well let them leave with the information they were looking for and have them remember us as the ones who provided it. And I don't think that if we keep enough information and send people to the right places at the right times and we call out to them, spark their curiosity, they'll leave right away in any case. I think people stay over time. For me, it's a false problem, but it's true that it's a bit of a tricky situation.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a question. Do you think we're moving towards much shorter content with only the precise answer to what users are searching for and avoiding all the unnecessary chatter around content?
Yes, that's actually super interesting. I think we're already there, actually. Whereas there's content that's half the length of the competitors, but contains the same information, a higher information density. So imagine you only have about a quarter of the information. You see, in a piece of content, A, and you have twice as much information, but with half as many words in a piece of content. B, I think content B will carry more weight and have more impact. I think that nowadays, when we just add more words to give content more weight, that's already kind of a dead approach. Even though word count is still a very good indicator for counting the amount of information in a text, because a 6,000 word text will always contain more information than a 300 word text. But in any case, we've already seen this. And in the US, there's already a trend where Google is featuring more and more very short content. Thank you. More and more. And with expertise and experience, they're showing a lot of Reddit and a lot of forums, etc. These are things that have already started happening, I think.
So yeah, what you're saying is that beyond the word count, what really matters in the end is the density of information in relation to the user's question.
Exactly.
Providing a complete answer.
That's right.
Next, we have a question from Hugo. Why prefer Gemini over ChatGPT?
That's an interesting one. I don't prefer Gemini over ChatGPT. I'm not a big fan of Gemini. I actually find Gemini pretty bad, to be honest. But for... what's that thing about war again? I forgot. A Chinese writer who wrote a book about Sun Tzu, that's it, about the art of war. He says you have to learn to know your enemies better than your friends, or something like that. So the day we have to go head to head with the SGU and fight against it, it's better if we know it. And getting to know it starts with this, by using Gemini before just sticking to GPT. That's all. Honestly, use both, because GPT is better than Gemini, in my opinion, personally. But use SG Mini to get to know it.
And use the Google SGO State Beta as well to get to know SGO better. Test it out. We're afraid of what we don't know.
Test all your content, all your niches, etc. on SGE. And you'll see that you may be more or less concerned depending on what you do, actually. Depending on the types of queries you're targeting, it can help you gain a better understanding of what you're going to be up against. See you soon.
Right. Next, we have a question from Aurore. In your opinion, what is the impact of the inverted pyramid on bounce rate or on the time users spend on websites?
So potentially, yes, the bounce rate might be a bit higher, but people just don't have the time anymore. They no longer have time to spend ages on a piece of content. So people aren't going to read all of your content sentence by sentence. If they don't find the information they're looking for right away, they're going to leave anyway. And there will be pogo sticking. They'll leave and go to someone else's site. And for me, that's the worst signal you can send to Google. It's when your visitor goes to get the information from one of your competitors instead of getting it from you. So if you are the last page visited by one of your visitors, for me, it's better to have a 100% bounce rate with your page being the last visited rather than the opposite, because that means your visitor is there and found the information they needed right away. And
maybe, if I may, I'd like to bounce back to the inverted pyramid. The idea is indeed the user doesn't have time. But how exactly am I going to convey the very essence of great content through the first few lines to hook them so they understand, okay, as I scroll down, they're also going to talk about this. So yes, it's worth scrolling down. You have to keep that in mind.
That's it. He'll realize he's missing information and that, in fact, he's looking for even more than he thought. And that will lead him to discover even more things within the content. But you have to give him the information very quickly because otherwise he won't go looking for it.
So from a user signal perspective, in theory, it's all positive. Next, we have a question from Guillaume. Will sponsored sites appear in the responses? Google SGE AI.
I don't know what you mean by sponsored site.
So sponsored site, I assume we're talking about ads, Google ads.
Yeah, so Google Ads, I've seen some tests that I've done. There are 2-3 models that are competing with each other. There's the model where it sends Google ads. And so the sponsored sites, as you call them, appear above the SGE. So basically Rocket, we have the search engine, then ADS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It definitely stops there. And then comes the SGE and then the organic results. And then there's the other model where it does this. Search bar, SGE, ADS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the organic results. And we also have a model where it integrates the ADS into the organic results. But we'll see how that works out. Honestly, it really depends. It's still in beta. They're testing it on a lot of things, so we'll see what comes of it.
Anyway, I think we shouldn't worry about the ads. Let me remind you that it's still 90% of Google's revenue. So there's no need to be concerned. If
you're currently paying for ads, don't worry, you'll keep on paying. There's no issue with that.
Thank you, Leo, for these different points in your answer. Sorry, we couldn't answer all the questions, but go ahead and add Leo on LinkedIn, on Twitter. To ask him questions, you have his contact information on the slide at the bottom left. Thank you very much for that, Leo. We will all meet back here again in about 10 minutes for the start of our next conference session. We are going to look at a very specific and concrete case study regarding Groupama Ganvi, where our speakers Alexa and Michelle will broadly explain in great detail exactly how they managed to successfully grow their traffic from 200,000 to over 2 million individual visits, thanks to a user-oriented content strategy. So I think this makes a good transition with all the advice you just gave. It's a great transition with a very concrete case, for sure, and with a very strong brand, Group A. Thanks again, Leo. And so see you all very soon. See you in 8 minutes for the next conference.
Thank you, Nicholas. And there you have it. Feel free to send me questions I haven't answered on Twitter, and I'll be happy to answer them. And I've also launched a YouTube channel not long ago where I regularly post videos, so feel free to check it out. It would be a great pleasure for me to make videos on all your topics. Thank you.
Thanks again, Leo.
Bye.